So yes, good morning, afternoon, and evening, since I think we're a nice international live stream, which is really cool to see, and thanks for organizing this. I'm going to be talking about code reviews. I also saw there's another talk in the schedule, which is about not using code reviews. So let's first start with the good side of the story, and then I'm very curious to hear later on what the other presenter has to tell. As I was already told, my name is Paco van Beckhoven. I am from the Netherlands, living in Switzerland, and I've been working for quite some time already in the field now, of which I spent quite some time as a consultant as well for various companies, mostly in the Netherlands, but also companies like Google and Picnic, where I saw a lot of different environments. And from that, I actually learned quite a lot of things. And when I moved and started working for Hexagon, I finally found a place where I can sort of apply all these rules and help the team mature. Which is also the reason why I created this talk, to sort of educate you about all the lessons that I learned, and also because I really like code quality. So my day-to-day job, I work as a software engineer at HXDR, which is it's a cloud-based platform that allows users to create and explore large 3D models from the browser. And there's also quite some other cool things we do, like, sorry, I just got distracted. There was some sound. We have drones that can do 3D scans and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's quite a nice place to work, and they were nice to give me some time to present for you this topic. So without further ado, I'd like to start with a nice, but also not so nice number. So 360 billion was the estimated cost of bugs in 2013, according to research done by Cambridge students. And this included the time of finding and fixing bugs. Now, given that this was in 2013, with all the inflation and all the things that are going on, you could say that by now, 11 years later, this probably has doubled, just like houses. So what can we do about this number? How can we reduce it? Because this is a big bite out of the IT industry. And one that is a fairly classical diagram that is shown is that the cost of fixing a bug increases over time, or depends on the stage of where it is found. So whenever you found something later in production, that means that you need to figure out what's going on. Probably there's some damage that you need to recover, and you need to figure out how to fix it. So there's a lot more time spent than if you do this earlier on. And one of the things that can help here to find a bug earlier is through something called code reviews. These typically take place around the coding and testing phase. Of course, there's a lot of reviewers also early in the project, but I'll be focusing on code reviews. And what is a code review? So I think it consists of three important parts. The first one we already mentioned, which is about finding and fixing bugs. So catching bugs early, saving money, frustration, and also reputation. But the other ones are maybe even more important, which is about learning and coaching, helping your teammates grow, learning from each other. And also it's a nice place to mentor new employees or the juniors to give them some guidance. And code quality. You can use this to sort of enforce and improve code quality over time, which I think, because, hey, this is the code quality conference, I really like code quality. Let's give it its own definition. What I like about this is effectively it covers many different things, from the maintainability to how readable it is, efficient, but also what I really a big fan of is coding conventions, consistency, and just following best practices. And this all is something that code reviews can help you with improving this. Now, this sounds all pretty good, right? I'd say. And yet still, you sometimes come across this. And I would like to add here that, yes, there are some nuances. Not everybody and not every team needs code reviews. I probably will like to hear that later on, some other reasons. But suppose you heavily invest in pair programming or mob programming. That means that you're ready to do the review on the go, which you could argue is maybe more efficient, or you're in a small, high-performing team. Of course, there's different things to consider here. Now, with that nuances, the question is how can we efficiently incorporate code reviews into our daily development practices? And that is through something called pull requests. And normally if I'm at a conference, I would do a show of hands where I would ask whether we should call it a pull request or a merge request. This is a bit harder online, but the reason why I ask this is specifically GitLab really pushes on the term merge request. I work with GitLab, and my co-workers punish me if I use the, they make it clear to me that I shouldn't use the term pull request because we use GitLab. In the end, throughout this whole presentation, whether I use pull request or merge request, I mean the same thing. It's about the request to merge a branch into, say, the main branch. And these pull requests have become sort of an integral part of our software development process. We use this to sort of gatekeep quality. And this is facilitated by most version control systems. I already mentioned GitLab, but there's of course a lot more. And these tools are really nice. They help us to create and review pull requests, and they also contain quite some useful integrations and features to improve reviews. Which is, I would say, great. I need to double check, yes. So one of the challenging things about doing an online presentation is that you don't know whether you are still connected. I am, so that's good. So these tools help us to create pull requests. However, even though these tools really help us, we often see the less pretty side of pull requests. Just to give you some idea, like one of the things we see are the pull requests that change half of the project. In this case, 55 files with the least amount of descriptive values in there. Like this is awful to review. But there's also the awful comments that people leave. It's not always a happy place. Then there's the fact that nobody really likes to review, so you always get these channels on Slack or Teams. Hey, can somebody review this? Can somebody review this? And last but not least, it's always the curse of the small pull requests, where you see that the small request with 10 lines gets picked up immediately. Everybody is now keen to review, and everybody has some opinion about the 10 lines you changed. So how can we address these issues? And one part of the solution lies in creating good and review-friendly pull requests. So for this, I'm going to assume that all the changes we made are well implemented. They are concise, focused, and tested. We're not doing 3 features at the same time and another bug fix. We should create separate pull requests for that. Now, one thing that I want to keep you in mind is that when people start reviewing, you should just assume that they come in blank. Even though maybe the whole team knows what's going on, the whole team doesn't know what was going on a year later when you look back at this pull request because you try to figure out why was something done in a certain way. So what makes a good pull request? And then I think we should always start with a good title. Now, a good title should be self-explanatory, like a good commit message. And in this case, fix bug, not good enough. Even though maybe the whole team knows because there's only one bug and everybody knows what's going on there, you might know it now, you don't know it later. And also maybe somebody else from the team doesn't know. So try to add some context, try to be more specific. And actually, as I already mentioned it, a good title is like a good commit message, is you can actually use the same conventions here. Because what we often see is that both commit messages, so either the pull request title becomes the commit message or the subject, and either the commit message or the pull request title usually also end up in the release notes. And with conventional commits, we sort of say we want to follow this convention, which makes it much easier to parse, but also to read commit messages. For example, you have the feed and the fix prefix, which allow you to sort of identify whether it's a major or a minor change. So this can be really helpful. And also don't forget to always include a reference to your issue tracker. For example, in Jira, most VCS tools actually automatically convert this to a clickable link so that you immediately get more of the functional context. Then the next step is description, which is also very important. And I'll just go over the different steps quickly. So I think the first one we should always add is some context. And this would be an extension of the title, maybe anything the reviewer should still know about the feature before you start reviewing. And then a what? A brief overview of the things that changed. So to sort of tell the reviewer what to expect. You made some changes to the DB, added a field to the response, and refactored the login logic. Just to give you a brief overview, then one that's often forgotten is the why. And then with this, I mean, why did you make certain decisions? Why did you make certain choices? Because at the time when you are implementing your pull request, you go through the mental process. Hey, I can go either left or I can go right. I can either use this framework or that framework, or this query or that query. And unfortunately, this knowledge is usually lost once you commit the pull request. Or sort of once you create a pull request and some time goes by and you don't know what was considered anymore. This is something that the reviewer typically likes to know. So what I always recommend is to, whenever you made some choices or some specific decisions, write them down so that the reviewer doesn't have to ask about it, and you can also know in half a year from now still why certain decisions were made. And last, which I also really like, the examples. This makes add some visibility to the changes that you made. Like, what did you actually change? And sure, not always makes sense if it's a small bug fix, but suppose you work in the front end, and it's nice to add some screenshots here of the things you built, so that people immediately, from the code, it's sometimes hard to guess how things will look. But also, this doesn't just stay with front end. For the back end, say you add a new API call, or you make some changes to the API, add an example request and response. If you make some changes to the database, add some example queries and results. Given the response example, suppose you added a new date-time field, people cannot immediately see which format is used. If you add an example response, you can see which date-time format was used, which might be relevant if you have another service that will depend on this and expects a certain date-time format, so that you can immediately spot that rather than this becoming a bug later on. And then the biggest challenge is to keep it all concise and readable, because nobody likes to read a wall of text. I think I'm not even able to read a big wall of text without distracting myself at least 20 times. So add some sections, some bullet points, maybe some emojis to keep it readable. And this is also something where ChatGPT can be really helpful. Also, by the way, this is not, of course, for every pull request. Not every pull request justifies such a large description. Maybe just a small bug fix, of course, you have to enter less. This also goes with some sanity in what makes sense. Now, to help you with writing a good description, use templates. These templates make sure that the text is consistent across all your microservices or repositories or teams. Everybody's using the same format, so you know what to expect where in a pull request. And what the best feature about this, I would configure this on a team base, is the use of checklists, because there's always things we forget. And these are sort of the last reminder before something makes it to develop or before the pull request is open. What things should we still do? And an example of this is the architecture diagrams. Suppose you have some Confluence page or some wiki page in which you update the diagrams. This only needs to happen, say, 1 every 10 pull requests, where you actually add a new endpoint or a new dependency, which means that the rest of the time you don't. And that means that you also sort of get it out of your rhythm and you forget that you actually have to do this. Maybe updating documentation or release notes. And the other part that I really like about this is that it's also sort of the voice in the back of your head when it comes to, say, did you add tests? Like the first one, changes are covered by tests. So if you didn't do it and you know you should do it, then this is the point where you sort of have the choice, okay, do I check it? But then I'd be lying if I didn't. So I should really write tests. It's sort of the second check, which I really like, because it's sometimes you're lazy. People are lazy. And then this is sort of the nice thing to remind them to not be lazy. Now, having created a nice and elaborate pull request, we need to do one more thing. And that is, what we also have to forget, is to review our own code. Don't just throw it over the fence. Oh, it works. It's done. No, have a look at it. And especially if you look at it from a VCS tool like GitLab or any other, instead you see your diff in a different perspective. You can now immediately easily see, oh, hey, I made a change to this file, but actually I don't even need to be there. Let's undo that line break, because it only adds noise to the pull request. Or you see, oh, wait, this name maybe I should improve the name, or maybe you chose 2 different approaches, and then there are some leftovers from the previous approach. But it's also useful to use commands to add some context. In this example here on the right, I actually removed the file, and because I wanted to make sure that it was not used, and also out of curiosity, I was looking since when this actually should have been removed. And because I did that research, I immediately just wrote it down. And now the next person doesn't have to figure this out for themselves. So it's immediately clear. It's again about, hey, you took the time and effort, just take that tiny little bit of time. I mean, how much time does it take to write this? A couple of 30 seconds, maybe? And you save some time of the people that are reviewing it. It makes it for them much more easier to see that you did your due diligence and trust on that. And you can also use it to highlight important parts. So suppose you did a bug fix in a file, but you also had to rename some fields, or maybe you had to format it and the formatting was off. And now you have 20 lines changed, even though there's only one relevant part. And then it might be helpful to add a comment on that one line saying, hey, this is the core fix. The rest is just formatting and style. And the last one that I also like is you can use this to ask specific questions to both about your own code. Hey, you're uncertain about a certain part, but also if you're integrating with another team, like, hey, can the API team have another look at this? Because I'm not sure whether it's done correctly. Then immediately they have the context, like it's in that class, rather than that they get the full pull request and have to figure out where their relevant changes are. Now we did do the proper pull request. We did review it. We already fixed some things again. At least for me, I always find things when I review it myself where I was like, hey, this saves me already 3 more comments. Now we need to get people to review it. And in an ideal world, you wouldn't have to ask for reviews. Either teams proactively check for pull requests, or you can round robin assign people in your version control system, and people actually use that. However, in practice, we see that people are not very keen on reviewing. It takes them time away from their current task, which means they have to switch context. Maybe they think they can't find anything, so they're like, oh, why should I spend time on this? So people are not really tempted to respond to these messages. And this is because what I used to call the diffusion of responsibility, or shared responsibility is no responsibility when it comes to things people don't like. If you have 20 people and 20 people don't want to do it, then usually if you just ask it in a void, nobody does it, especially in something as anonymous as a team chat. Now, the best way to address this is by targeting specific people. Don't just say, hey, can anybody? Hey, teammate A or team member B, can you please have a look at it? If you tag the wrong one, they are most likely willing to tell you who's the right person, so you at least have some response and you know where to go. Also, what helps is to add some context. What is this PR pull request about? Because if I'm maybe coincidentally working on the same service on the same issue or a similar area, then for me it's much easier to pick it up. So it's already much clearer what this is about. And the deadline, add some sense of urgency, just so that people know whether it needs to happen right away or whether they can do it tomorrow morning. And something like that it would look something like this. So in this case, we tag some specific people. Maybe we add some team in the loop so that they can see whether there's actually being picked up. And we add some context. And the chances that we get a reply on this is much higher than on the first one, because probably we need to send out a reminder 2 or 3 times. And this actually is not just about asking for reviews. This is asking about for anything. If you are in Teams or in Slack and you need some information from another team or some help, it can be good to tag specific people, add context, add some urgency, and then people are more likely to help you. But this is, of course, this won't always work, and people are still going to forget. And it's good to keep that in mind. We all forget things. If I get a message while I'm also looking at this presentation, then maybe I've seen the message, but it's now marked as read and I'm distracted and now I forgot about it. It's okay to remind people and be patient with that. But of course, at some point, it's also okay to try to fix this. Now, we finally get some people to look at a pull request. How do we deal with the feedback that we get? Because not all feedback goes as expected. And it's good to keep in mind that this is not necessarily done with bad intentions. And there are people that simply lack the social skills, are not very aware of their social environment. And what you also often see is that there might be cultural differences at play. So take me, for example. I'm from the Netherlands. The Netherlands are known to be quite direct. So when we think of something, we'll tell you that. When we don't like something, you'll know. That's why we're so good at complaining. Which also means that when I work in an international team, it's good for me to maybe add some fluff to the messages I'm sending to make it look less harsh. But it's also good for the rest of the team to know that, hey, this is my normal way of communication. It's not because I don't like you. It's just because I don't know any better. In the end, it's mostly important to not take these things personal. If you want to be a real professional, then you have to be above all the office drama. You have to be patient and just be the bigger person and maybe help the other people by giving them feedback in a correct way to tell them, hey, the way you communicate sounds a bit harsh. Maybe you can improve. Because that's in the end what a professional is being about, and about being senior. It's about helping the team forward rather than ending in petty fights. What you also see is the fake feedback. And what you now can do when you get feedback like this is go into sort of trial and error approach, trying to figure out what this person meant with this and how it should be improved. It would save yourself a lot of time to just ask for clarification or suggestions. That's okay. Especially if somebody just doesn't like it, that's so vague, then you can don't waste your time trying to figure out what is meant here. Just ask for clarification instead. And the same also goes for speaking of saving time, the endless discussions. Please pick your battles. Not every space has to be a tab or the other way around, or it's at least not that important. But there might be things that are very important where you think, okay, if this makes it all the way through production, we have a serious issue. Then, and you're already in the 6th or 7th or 8th reply in your thread, maybe that's a good moment to not continue in the thread. It's nice to have these async communication tools and means, but it gets really distracting and it takes a lot of time for such a discussion to take place. It's much better to then at that point just take it offline or online, going through a synchronous discussion where you talk to each other and then come to a conclusion. And then what's really important and often forgotten is that people don't report back the results of the discussion. What was decided and why? And these are two very valuable things. Again, half a year from now, I have a similar problem. I look on Slack for this problem, and I now find that people had a discussion, but I don't know what the answer was. And they probably also forgot. And the same goes for pull requests or any open source discussion you sometimes see. Always report back. And it's just a one-liner. Again, it's 30 seconds, and it's so helpful. The future you will be very grateful for that. Well, speaking of being grateful, not all the feedback will be bad. There will also be lots of useful feedback. You will learn new things, or you will write better code and introduce less bugs. And it's important to also be grateful about this, because people took the time and effort to go over your changes, even though they might not like it. Rather than always saying fixed, done, ok. Maybe show some appreciation of the things that you actually learned about a new API call or something like that. Because a friendly message goes a long way, which also improves the culture of the company. People are more friendly, especially if you do a lot of remote work, then there's not a lot, it's easy to get annoyed and you don't really speak to each other. People tend to get frustrated. Also show some things. It also adds confidence. Suppose the junior is reviewing for the first time, finally found something, then it can be really empowering to sort of tell them, oh, hey, that's a great question. Oh, hey, that's a really good suggestion. I actually learned something new. Because that empowers them, and it will also help them progress in their careers. And in the end, also will help you again. Now, enough about the reviewee side. We're going to switch to the reviewers seat. So we're now going to give reviews. And there's two important things that I want to start with. The first one is don't wait too long. Review in a timely manner, because the longer it takes, the more time is lost on merge conflicts and switching context. What I actually liked, I saw a presentation on this topic as well, where they said, ideally, whatever work you do is on a backlog, which is prioritized by some product owner. which means that the first task is being picked up has the highest priority. Which also means that whenever you're going to pick up a new task and there's still work that needs to be reviewed, that work has a higher priority than your work, which means you should review that first before you start picking up new work. And I kind of think this makes sense. Another thing that you can do is when you start the day, you are fresh. You don't have to switch context. You can just spend the first hour of your day reviewing pull requests, just to get that rid of, and then you can have some focus time, and maybe at the end of the day do some more pull requests so that you don't have to switch context, but also keep up with it. And the other thing that's really important is taking responsibility. You often see the 500-line change, and people comment within 5 minutes, doing a 500-line review, saying looks good to me, and then click the approve button, and you know already that there was no proper review done there. Whenever you click that approve button, that means that you become the co-owner of the change, and which also means you are accountable. So whenever, say, something goes wrong, it turns out there's a serious bug in there, and the person who wrote is on holiday, you should be the next one in line to be able to answer the questions. Which means it's in your best interest to do a proper review rather than, yeah, I don't feel like it, but hey, at least it looks like I did something. And when we start reviewing, it's important to start with getting some context. We just spent quite some time creating a nice pull request description, so it would be a waste if we don't read it. Because often that's already where quite some answers to our questions are, especially if described well. And I've been in the seat of this picture as well, and where I dive straight into the code, and I'm like, what is going on? What is going on? And then at some point, before I start typing questions, I first want to go back to the description, and then there's my answer already. So save yourself some time and read the description first. It makes it much easier to review. But it's also, this goes two ways, because that means if there is no description at all, it's also okay to just push back on the review, the code review, and the pull request, and say, hey, please add some description, because I can start guessing and reverse engineering from your change what you're actually doing, but this is not very efficient. And again, in the future, this will also not be very helpful. So don't waste somebody's time there. It goes two ways again. The same also, have a look at the existing comments. Don't go into the wild, because you don't want to ask the same questions that somebody else already did. It's kind of inefficient. Maybe it has already been discussed. Then we start looking at the code. And even though it's always very tempting to go straight into the code and in the code style issues, because that's what we know best, start from the top. And the main reason from that is that any feedback you have on the top that needs to be changed will trickle down. If the design is wrong, then probably all the codes or the tests need to be written anyway. So no use in looking at the tests or looking at code style if it might be rewritten. So we start with the high-level overview. Whether the functionality, the high-level overview, if the functionality is in the right place. And then we go a step further. We see, is the functionality implemented correctly? Are certain scenarios missed? And then we start looking at the code, whether the complexity is okay. Well, we just learned about the cyclomatic complexity, but is there, of course, more? Is it readable? Can it be implemented in maybe a more efficient way? And then, and this is why I added it in bold, the tests. Tests often get the least amount of love, not only and attention during implementation, but also during reviewing, which means that this is a double the issue, because tests are really important. Tests give us confidence in the sense that I'm talking, for example, about unit tests, whether we don't break something by accident. And what you see is that even I do it sometimes when I'm reviewing, and I finally reviewed through the 60 files of production code that changed. I still have to look at 20 more tests that are also changed, which are usually written slightly less efficient. But it's so important to look at whether the assertions are done right and whether the code is actually correctly covered. If it's not, in the end, a bad test suite will also affect you, because you might be introducing bugs because somebody else didn't do their work correctly. So what can help here is to go for the tool-assisted reviews. What can help here is the tools some tools like the VCS tools. In the left, what you see here is GitLab allows you to show code coverage in the diffs if you supply it with Cobertura code coverage. And I think there's some other VCS tools that allow you as well. So you immediately see if something is covered or not. Sonar can also integrate often with your tools and already give you some hints. But in the end, the best tool to use is your own editor. And I know I have to give a small disclaimer here because this is Java code on a .NET conference. I'm very sorry, but actually I am secretly a Java developer. I did do some things with .NET, but the example still holds. What you see here is I made some small changes. I introduced an extra if statement, just like an early exit, and I replaced some constant. And now in the GitLab, this kind of looks okay. But if I now look in my editor, your editor usually gives you a much broader context because you can now see the entire file. And now I can see that, hey, this constant is now unused, or hey, my editor actually has a suggestion to improve this. Or if I've run the test, which you can also do with Rider, and I think also with Visual Studio, you can run the tests, measure the code coverage, and have that inlined there. So now I can see this red means that, hey, this return statement is not tested. And one of the things that I see the least is that people actually look at the code coverage when reviewing. And it's so important because this means that somebody should just write an extra test here to improve coverage. And the last is also that you have some extra context in the latest versions of at least IntelliJ, and I think also Rider, where you can see which files or lines were changed within if you open a certain branch. Now there's also some AI-powered tools because with the rise of AI, we also have a rise of AI review tools. I haven't taken a look at them yet, also because it's often a bit complicated to just go around in your company with a new AI tool that may or may not use your data. But I would definitely recommend to have a look at them and see how they can help you, because also they can help you save time on reviews. Now, we also need to write some good commands. And whenever we give feedback, what I often see is, and what I don't like to see is the word you and bold statement. So if you look at this example here, this is quite a bold statement. And it doesn't sound very friendly. It actually sounds quite harsh. However, and that's also the problem. If you use you, it can be interpreted as a direct attack, which makes people defensive and less likely to cooperate. Whereas we is about collective ownership. It's about collaboration. So you're already, hey, we made a weird choice, even though, of course, implicit, it's the person who made the changes. You didn't make the changes, but it's about the collective. And the same goes for bold statements. If I make a bold statement, there's also a chance that I'm wrong because nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. And I personally don't like to be wrong. And I also don't like it when other people are making bold statements and are wrong. It makes them look like a fool. Use questions instead. The nice thing about asking a question is that you also allow the other person to explain why they made a certain decision and or come to the same conclusion that you might want to give them themselves. Instead, you chose the wrong framework. Why did we choose Y? I understood X is more actively maintained. This is so much more friendly and so much more likely to get a positive response rather than a defensive response. And this, again, also improves the reason that people will listen to your the likeliness that people will listen to your suggestions. Another thing is to stay away from vague comments. Can you improve this? I don't like this. I don't like it. Can we do this different? It's vague. It only adds vagueness, and it can be interpreted in multiple ways. Try to stay away from these words like this or it. And it's a small effort to just write down what you meant. And it reduces the chances of miscommunication, which again reduces time wasted on figuring out what is meant as well. And the best way to do this, what I usually do, and this also goes further than just pull requests, always reread whatever email, Slack message, Teams message, or command you've written, whether there are not multiple interpretations possible. Because miscommunication is really a source of possible bugs and issues. Always try, and also when you say you don't like something, try to provide an alternative solution as well. Don't be like, I don't like it. Try to think along with the person rather than just telling them it's wrong. That's also, again, much more cooperative. Another good feature, the use of suggestions. Most VCS tools have this. For GitLab, it's the second button, where you can immediately already propose a change, and that person can then use a button to immediately apply that change. And this has two advantages. The first one is that the person who has to make the changes doesn't have to go in the code, figure out where it is, make the change. And the reviewer doesn't have to go look at the pull request again and see whether the change was done correctly. So you save time on two sides, which is very useful. There's one caveat, though, that you don't want to. You should at least make sure that if somebody suggests to rename a variable, there will always also be usages. And this is, of course, not a smart refactoring, which means that you might want to point out, oh, don't forget to rename its usages. Now, I was at a conference recently, and there was somebody named Wojtek who also mentioned something called conventional commands, which there's commits, but there's also commands. And it helps to structure pull request commands. And what I specifically like about this is indicating whether a command you made is important or whether it's just a very minor style issue, which, I mean, it's okay if it's not implemented. Because it helps the reviewer again. Okay, I don't need to have a discussion about this. Okay, it's a nitpick, sure, whatever. Versus, oh, this is blocking. I really need to fix this. And the nice thing about this is, again, consistency, which is always great. Besides that, pull requests are not happy. Are not always very happy. You're always telling about the things that went wrong. It's important to also tell what went right. Try to find something positive. And that can be anything. Maybe you're happy about the feature they implemented. Maybe the pull request is nice and concise. Maybe you learned about a new API call, or maybe you learned a new way to write things. Maybe you're just happy that somebody did something that you really didn't want to do. And then anything more than just looks good to me was really helpful here. Show some appreciation, because in the end, first it adds a layer of friendliness, which also means people are more likely to listen to all the other things you suggested. And what's also really important, it really boosts their confidence, people's confidence, especially in a time where you see a lot of imposter syndrome and people being uncertain. It really helps them to get, again, more confidence, which helps you on the long way as well. So having covered pull requests, there's one more thing that I want to cover, which is bike shedding. And I'll be quick because I see I'm running a bit close on time. Bike shedding, also known as the law of triviality, is about the fact that people give a disproportionate amount of time on trivial issues. The story comes from a bike shed or a company board meeting where they spend more time discussing the bike shed of the company rather than the power plant project that they should be discussing, because it's easier to discuss something that you know will affect you, which are things like A is equals an empty string or is empty, which are exactly the same. They do the same. And it just, in the end, it doesn't really matter which you choose, as long as you're consistent. And all these commands add a lot of noise. So one of the things to reduce this noise is to automate parts of this. For example, through enforcing formatting. Now I learned that actually, so that I must admit, in .NET or in C#, the editor and the Roslyn compiler and everything around it already have so much in there that help you write proper code and write consistent code. That was really impressive, so I had a lot less tools to add here. Try to stay as close to industry standards and enforce it. I learned that you can do this with editor config and something like .NET format. Add this to the build as well, and make sure that it fails when it's not formatted, just so that the code is always formatted. Then you also don't need to spend time on this during reviews, which again saves time in the long run. The other one that I briefly wanted to mention is Arch Unit. This is both for Java and .NET available, and it allows you to test your architecture. So in .NET, it looks a bit like this, where you can define packages. So say there's the namespace service and there's the namespace controller. And typically you always say you cannot talk from the service to the web. It's always from web to service. It's an architecture, and you can enforce this in a unit test by saying, hey, any types that are defined in the service layer should not depend on any types that are defined in the web layer. And this way you can sort of create more consistently, which saves time in reviews again, because you don't have to pay attention to this. Same for naming conventions. Again, the nice thing in .NET is quite widely the convention to start with an I, whereas in Java, you have 4 more ways to define interfaces, and every company uses a different one. If you only have one, then there's no room for discussion. So whenever you start introducing these tools, it still is good to involve the team. Add some example pull requests to discuss the rule sets and things you like or not, so that everybody's on board. And then to sort of conclude, I think it's important to write descriptive pull requests and also to review them yourself to catch already the first mistakes. Be specific in your communication, but also be friendly. Try to find the positive things. Show your gratitude. Show your appreciation to the people around you. Then use the features of your editor and your VCS to help you review. Don't forget to check the code coverage and check if the tests are also properly reviewed. And then at the end, stop bike shedding, stop having petty discussions about tiny things, automate it away. If you can, automate it, then you cannot have the discussion. And that's it. Thanks a lot.